I wrote a 100,000 word fanfic about a Nuzlocke run. And if you didn't know that was a thing you could do, come with me, because I'm going to answer a bunch of your questions. What is this post layout? What's a storylock? Who the heck is Sprung Gooey Duck? Well, they're me, and I'm going to explain everything you're seeing and a whole lot more. It's just going to take a while. Where to even begin? Quite frankly, there's a chunk of decently necessary context that the average Nuzlocke viewer who's only really aware of the YouTube and Reddit spheres is going to need, so we'll start with that. Sprung Gooey Duck is a random Xbox Live username that I got when I was 11 because I'm bad at names, that remained my online brand for about a decade, and remains so to this day on a little corner of the internet called the Nuzlocke Forums. The Nuzlocke Forums is a forum, and as I make this, I'm kind of having to confront the uncomfortable thought that there are people about to graduate high school who probably don't know what a forum is or how to use one. The forums were founded in 2010 by a group of 4chan users led by Nick Franco, the original Nuzlocke who created Pokemon Hard Mode, the comic that would later form the basis for the Nuzlocke Challenge. The forums were meant to be a separate, more formal space for discussing fan comics and other creations related to the Nuzlocke Challenge. And, about 5 years into the forum's history, I signed up. I've never been artistically gifted, so making a webcomic like Pokemon Hard Mode was out of the question. But I am a writer, and Storylocks, a medium of Nuzlocke storytelling done entirely through the written word, were starting to have a bit of an upswing around the time I was getting onto the forums. Of course, Three of Hearts, the topic of this video, doesn't come from that upswing. It doesn't come from when I started, because I was a teenager, and I was terrible at writing. It comes from 2022, a time when, for personal and community difficulty reasons, I thought I was out of the game. The blame for me getting back into the Storylock game and writing Three of Hearts lies in two places. The first of which is Zinelock, a Nuzlocke community zine project put on by my friend Arowana over the summer of 2022. After being quite distant from the Nuz writing scene for about a year for one reason or another, joining the zine really recharged my creative batteries and introduced me to a ton of really creative and dynamic writers. It was this wonderful group of people, who I'm still close with today, that gave me the shot in the arm I needed to pull myself back from the second thing that inspired 3OH's creation: working on my book, a thing I am still doing almost 3 years later. But back then, I had just finished a 70,000 word first draft and started sinking my teeth into revisions with an eye towards getting the book traditionally published. And I realized that I really was not vibing with the energy that traditional publishing and having to warp my book around an audience and marketability and saleability was bringing to the table. I wanted to write something entirely for myself, something ridiculous and fun and deeply, deeply self-indulgent. I wanted to write a spy story. Okay, almost, but not quite. There we go. So, as you can probably tell from my inspiration slides, we're not exactly looking at a gritty, grounded, Craig Fingersuck looking spy story here. We're talking high-tech, high-fashion, over-the-top super spy girls. And as you can probably tell from that rather out-there premise for a piece of Pokemon fanfiction, if you came here expecting professional blow-by-blow analysis of high-level Nuzlocke gameplay, you might be watching the wrong video. Honestly, when I was first mulling over writing this story, I wasn't even sure it was going to be a piece of Pokemon fanfiction, but getting back into the Nuz writing community for the zine really lit that spark again and made me wonder what I could do with a spy story like this in the Pokemon world. As a brief TLDR, a storylock takes the events of Nuzlocke gameplay and adapts them, albeit in my case and the cases of many others in the modern era, very, very loosely, into a piece of fanfiction. This, of course, meant that very early in the planning process I had to raise the question of what game I was going to play for the actual Nuzlocke run, and this ended up being a lot more important than I originally thought. I pretty quickly settled from a narrative and character perspective on Pokemon Black. I really liked the offering of characters that it gave me to convert into fun super spies. I ended up settling on the female protagonist, who eventually became named Anita, her rival Bianca, and Iris. Iris took a bit longer to settle on, but she ended up being really awesome in the story, so I'm glad I picked her. There was just one small problem. Quite recently, I'd already completed a hardcore Nuzlocke of Pokemon Black, and I wasn't exactly looking forward to using the same small selection of Pokemon from the Unova Dex again. I settled on a solution that ended up changing the entire shape of the story. I harked back to a run of Emerald I'd done a few years ago when I was bored of the Hoenn Dex and wanted to use some new guys, where I had randomized only the wild Pokemon to similar strength to create sort of the illusion of an every Pokemon Drayano hack within the vanilla game without messing with trainers or Pokemon balance or anything like that. And I sat back and I thought, how the heck am I going to incorporate all these weird randomized Pokemon narratively? And then I thought, what if the randomization was the narrative? What if a mysterious ecological catastrophe known as the Shuffle had taken all of Unova's wild Pokemon and replaced them with weird random new ones, wreaking havoc across the region and requiring the reactivation of a millennia-old spy agency to combat the threat and the various groups that rose up to try and find less safe solutions to the problem. As such, the Swords of Justice and the plot of Three of Hearts was born. I posted the first chapter of Three of Hearts on the Nuzlocke forums on July the 1st, 2022, and over the next 2 years, 20 plus chapters and 100,000 words, it would take that baseline of a Nuzlocke run and go so far beyond, becoming an explosive, world-saving, twisting spy adventure. Originally, the rest of this video was going to be me kind of giving you the spark notes on Three of Hearts, recapping the plot in a somewhat condensed format. But I got about 4 chapters in, and the video was already like 20 minutes long, and honestly, just a Spark Notes recap doesn't really do the story justice, and isn't the kind of video I want to make. If you want to read it yourself, the links are in the description, although the AO3 link you will need an AO3 account for, as the story is restricted to protect against AI scraping. I think the reason I went back to this half-formed video and still wanted to put a piece and a version of it out is because I wanted to let people know that these types of stories are still and have always been out there. It seems like something's been lost in the Nuzlocke sphere. There's so much focus on gameplay and attempts and ultra-hardcore super hacks that, I don't know, I just want to let people know that the forums and these comics and stories and runs that are spinning Nuzlocks into these crazy narratives are still out there pushing the boundaries. So honestly, I would highly recommend reading the story on the forums, because you might find something else that strikes your fancy. There's loads and loads of runs that honestly I think you should read because they're really good. So yeah, go do that. Till next time.